Okay, I think we're going to get started, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of our very first panel of the day, Immigration and Peace, Critical Issues in the Classroom and Community. My name is Marcy Campos, and I'm the director of the Center for Community Engagement and Service. So as you can tell from the name of our office, we are very much dedicated to having not only our students and faculty extend learning into the broader DC metro area, but also making sure that all the work that we do is not only beneficial to learning and higher education, but also is benefiting the broader community, given the many, many challenges that we know we're facing, both locally and nationally and internationally. So given that, I'm going to be very brief. We have a fantastic array of panelists with very distinct experiences. So we're going to hear from Ludy Grandas, who teaches on AU's campus with world language and culture, and she's worked actively, gotten her students out in the community. Guelespe was at Georgetown when she did this really impactful community-based research project with DMV and with the immigrant community around limited driver's license. And Barbara Wien and Robin Adams worked throughout last year on a peace project that wasn't just about peace, it was about many different components, and worked with different community agencies, got staff and faculty involved, and worked with young people in the District of Columbia. So you'll hear about all of them. So our idea is that each person will talk for 7 or 8 minutes. There's a short film at the end, but we will leave time for your questions. But one other question, just does anybody want to share, like, what is it or what drew you most to this session, or what do you most want to get out of the session? Anybody willing to just call out on that? Yes.
Resources
To
teaching.
Resources for teaching. Okay, great. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm teaching school communication, and more of my students have international experience or interested in international news or both, and so I'm just kind of feeling out how that might play into some of your research and what I can take back to the classroom.
Yes.
So I work with TESOL students, and our students go and volunteer, teach in community-based English language programs, and work with immigrants a lot. And I'm very curious to see what our panelists and audience do in terms of immigrant involvement, to think about what projects I can bring into my class as well.
Excellent. Great. Anybody else?
Yes, I teach ESL students, so they're new to the United States, and they're interested in all of these topics.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that's really helpful. As I said, we will have time for questions at the end, and we do want to know, like, what resonates with you, and then what further resources we can provide. For those of you who don't know my office, we're right that way on this floor, MGC 273. We have lots of great material for those of you who want to incorporate community-based learning into a course, or help your students organize a project in the community, whether it's in class or out of class. We support a variety of those initiatives, so we're happy to talk to you more if it doesn't, end up being something we can fit in today. So with that, we will start with Ludy Grandas, who is going to talk about her work with day laborers.
Well, good morning, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Marcy, and the organizers of this panel. It's very nice. And it gives me a great pleasure to share some of my experiences working with the community and how happy that makes me, and it makes the students and the community even happier. So I'm going to read a few parts because they are fundamental. They are sort of the core of my pedagogical approach, and then I'm going to share the rest of the experience. So, as a follower of critical pedagogy, I strive to take the language of hope, and that is in quotations, to heart. In critical pedagogy, there prevails a process of inquiry, of critique, but also a process of constructing. It is only then that learning becomes relevant, critical, and transformative. So a community-based learning approach, which is exactly what Marcy proposes and encourages us to do to the Center for Community Engagement. So a community-based learning approach only solidifies critical pedagogy because in CB, students critically process and reflect on their experiences, engage with central academic topics, which theory and practice and help clarify and enhance personal values, career goals, and most importantly, a great sense of social responsibility, which is what I really strive for in my classes. So I have never taught a community-based learning course per se because I'm scared of it. It takes a lot of preparation and time, but I'm going to do it this semester. So let's see. But I do take a little bit of the components of CV courses of the community-based approach in small doses, and I've been doing it for the last 3 years. So. So I teach different courses in Latin American studies and also Hispanics in the US. I teach also topics of globalization, identity, popular culture. And so when I have the opportunity to sort of envision a little bit of a project, I add this component into my syllabus and I happily engage my students in that. So, I established a very close relationship with Trabajadores Unidos de Washington, D.C., Workers United of Washington, D.C., and I work very closely with Arturo Ricketts, who's been an activist for a long time. He's Panamanian, and he's been Afro-Panamanian. It's extremely interesting at the corner of the Home Depot where day laborers stand every day, and especially because he sort of bridges the gap between the Central American day laborers and the African American day laborers that also go to the corner. It's quite interesting. All right. So one of the reasons why I chose the day laborers, the day labor organization, is because their mission and vision really goes hand in hand with what we propose here at AU. But one of the things that really sort of enticed me to work with Arturo is that he envisions the day laborers not only sort of people who we have to serve or anything, but he really makes sure that they become leaders themselves of the same organization. So he is working very hard to make sure that they participate actively in the solution of their own problems. It's not only that Arturo or other day laborers, find labor for other people, but that how is it that they organize? So this is where Arturo and I get together and see what we can do to entice the day laborers to participate more actively. And then day laborers have come many times to the university, to the classroom, and they feel so special when they come here, and my students feel very blessed what they do. So these are some of the values that the day labor organizations work with, follow. So I'm going to share with you 2 projects that we did with the organization. In 2014, during 2 semesters, remember it's only 10% per of the grade for each of the courses, but we managed to write 3 newsletters, 3 bilingual newsletters. Each newsletter had 5 pages more or less. So my students actively worked on this. The day laborers came. Since we read a lot of stuff about Latin America in my classes, we analyzed, we researched. So we developed a very long list of questions that we wanted to ask the day laborers. So when the day laborers came, my students were well informed on how to proceed, which kinds of questions to ask, and follow-up questions as well. And the day laborers were more than happy to share. They are always happy to share their experiences, always happy to have somebody to listen to their plight. So we did this, we did 3 of these newsletters, and the newsletters were distributed to the DC government all around. But it was interesting because the day laborers themselves found out a lot of information about things that they need. And one of the things, for instance, that we did in, let's say, number 1 and 2 of the newsletter was that at the time in 2014, there was all this issue of the driver's license and how to provide driver's licenses to undocumented day laborers or undocumented immigrants, and what they had to do, or the process that they had to go through. So we did that in the newsletter, and that was just one of the things that we did in there. Also, sort of provide information on wage theft and how to proceed if their wage was stolen, which happens a lot, and that's one of the things that Arturo does, is to sort of recover those monies. So this is one of the things we did. And the other project that we did was also a 1-year project. It was a photo exhibit that was exhibited here at the Capson. So for this photo exhibit, the day laborers took the photos themselves with their cell phones. There was no fancy thing to, that they had to learn. They did not understand my instruction when they gave it in sense of, I want you to take photos of your own everyday life as day laborers. So it took a long time, many months of, so what is it that you want to photograph about yourself? And so they took photographs of other people, like on the street or whatever. So no, it's your own photos about your own experience as a day laborer. So it was a little bit difficult, but the end result was fantastic. There were many, many beautiful pictures, and so I just wanted to show you a few of them. The one in there is one of my favorite, the second. So you see the corner of the Home Depot there is the only Home Depot in DC. That's where most of the stuff takes place. And so the exhibit basically was organized showing a whole day from morning to evening and everything that happens in between. So the exhibit takes you through this whole journey. So as you can see, some of the day laborers took these photos. If you go to the corner with a fancy camera, they won't show their faces. They will just run away from you, especially now. It's very, very complicated. In 2016, it was not that complicated, but still, and I love it when they take pictures because it is themselves taking the pictures. So the second stage was at work, and one of the things I want to highlight from this is that many jobs are not considered day labor, but day laborers are, for instance, waitresses and waiters. If they don't work, they don't get any money, and that's exactly what is defined under day labor. And another thing that I wanted to rescue here is women, and women work in different instances as day laborers. Women do not go to the corner. It's dangerous to go to the corner, but their husbands go. And it is their husbands that find work for them. And once the woman is known for her work, then it's easier for them to get more work. I'm trying to think of a project that only involves women that way. And this is me time, and this is one of these two photos are extremely telling of the situation of the day laborers, and also very artistic in my view. And so the reason why I called, this presentation, the way I called it, from corner to the classroom and back, it's because, it traces everything, and I have a photo in there. I took that picture of my students interacting with one of the women day laborers, and then the exhibit, and then back to the street, back to the corner. And the last thing I want to mention is that this is the very first time I'm going to teach a civic course, a full-fledged civic course, and I have already started working on a way to improve the website of the day laborer. It is very hard to implement a day labor center because of permissions. There's no money for that, and nobody wants to see a day labor center in Washington, D.C., but we can do it virtually. So what I'm proposing in my civic course is to have sort of a virtual working center run by Workers United of Washington, D.C., and we already started to populate the website with podcasts. Last semester, my students and the Hispanics in the U.S. class completed 7 podcasts. The day laborers came. Okay, they came twice, and at the end of the semester, we had pupusas, and we listened to the final version of the podcast. Everybody was very happy with that. So I'm going to continue working with them. I'd rather have one good relationship, and I want to keep preserving it, and my students feel very, very happy to have the opportunity to learn, to interact, and it is a game for everybody. I have plenty more to say.
Okay, so now let's pass the baton to Diana. Diana's been very involved also in the immigrant community. Started at Georgetown, but is now working at University of Maryland. So it might sound a little confusing, but she's focusing on the work she did at Georgetown.
Yes, thank you, Marcy, and thank you everyone for being here today. Just want to say that I'm scratching the surface, so feel free to, ask any questions. I know for looking at it, it's like, oh, it's so hard to cram everything in this time, but we're happy to be here and share this information. So just to tell you a little bit, give you some context for the project. It was a community-based research project that I conducted with the immigrant community while I was at Georgetown at the Center for Social Justice. But the work also spilled into, it was a 2-year project, and the work also spilled into a course that I taught on immigration and even into other campus units. So you'll hear more about that as I progress through the slides. But really, it was a project that was able to integrate students who were really interested in working in the community, learning more about immigration, and how to conduct research. And so, as a sociologist, I study mixed status immigrant families. Right? So mixed status families is where one family member, usually a parent, sometimes both parents or both spouses, are undocumented. And one of the things I learned was that they very meticulously schedule their lives in a way that reduces their risk for being stopped by the police, detained, and potentially deported and separated from their families. And some of you may or may not know, but most states in the country do not allow undocumented immigrants to obtain licenses. And this is one of the risks, right, that they have to navigate every day. DC does allow, and in 2014 did allow, or pass a law that allows them to get their driver's license. But there are many challenges, right, in the implementation of this law. And so this is where this community-based research project was started, right? And so I'm just going to highlight two challenges for the sake of this presentation. But one was that there was a separate process created for undocumented residents in terms of getting their license, and that is that they needed to set up an appointment to receive service at a DMV. And the first appointment available was usually 4 to 6 months away. So if you guys are familiar, for most residents, there's walk-in service, right? We don't need an appointment to get. The second major challenge was that there was a lack of bilingual materials and bilingual staff to assist residents seeking this license, and that's required, right, under DC, the language access law. So those were two challenges. Now, there were several people that were already, and entities that realized these challenges and were working towards them, albeit individually, right? And so Georgetown students, like AU students, had been working with through ESL tutoring programs. They realized that when day laborers and other people started to present students with DMV documents or forms, that there was an issue here, right? And so students were working on it by assisting, one-on-one. Community organizations were also providing, help on a case-by-case basis as their residents were coming to them and saying, we got turned away, we didn't have the right paperwork or whatever. Then they began to accompany or help people complete their paperwork so that they wouldn't be turned away in that first appointment. So, and just to back up a little bit, if you waited 4 to 6 months and went to your appointment and there was something wrong with your paperwork, or for whatever reason you were not able to communicate with the DMV staff person, you were turned away and then required to set up another appointment. So you can see how this process could easily result in a waiting period of 8 to 12 months. I was also looking at it from a researcher standpoint too. I had studied mixed status immigrant families. I've worked on the driver's license issue before, and I wanted to follow this next phase of implementation. So by going to community meetings and meeting, community organizations like Grandas, Workers United, the Central American Resource Center, and many others who are already meeting with government offices like the DMV director, the Office of Latino Affairs, Office of Human Rights, around this issue to figure out what could be done. And so it was a perfect opportunity for all of us to kind of come together, harness our efforts and our energies and our skills, and come to an agreement. Let's work together. Let's try and bring whatever information to the table and figure out what kind of recommendations or changes that need to be made to help folks get through the process faster. That's just a little bit about the project. And in the top picture, you see early on we had a roundtable discussion. And it's one of the few pictures that we have with so many stakeholders. So I'm in the picture, I have students who served as research interns, the DMV director, Lucinda Bayers, is there. There's a representative from the Office of Human Rights who's also with us. The staff from both of our community agencies, but also staff from other agencies who also pitched in. Centronina is an organization you all may be familiar with, and another campus unit called the Cal Manavitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Force. So all of them had ties to the issue in some way or another. And the last picture was taken later in the project when we began to publish reports and present findings from our report to DC Council members. So what was the impact of the student? I'll just briefly take you through the student impact, the impact on the institution, and community impact as well. So students participated in this project in a number of ways. One, they were trained as field researchers, so they went through IRB training, they shadowed me and conducting interviews. They conducted interviews themselves. The majority of the 75 interviews were conducted by students. They transcribed interviews. They learned how to code and pull out findings. They presented, and so this is a student who is presenting at the DC Council policy briefing that was held 1 year into the project of presenting initial findings. One of the pictures that's missing, unfortunately, is a student in the field actually interviewing a day laborer in the parking lot of Home Depot on Rhode Island Avenue. So and Ludy and I crossed paths as we were working on this, at the same time with similar partners. And they also testified at public hearings, as public witnesses and advocates. They use the opportunity to process, what they were learning as researchers and really, advocated in this way. And I think this was one of the most important things for me. It was a goal that I wanted students to learn how they could be advocates in their professions, right? I think students sometimes think, tutoring is a great service project, and especially for introducing students into the community. And I think sometimes they quickly go to, then participating in marches or even getting arrested. And for me, I feel like we need to teach them the skills how to be advocates in their future professions. Because advocacy is not something that, I want them to learn just when they have extra time or when they're in college. It's something that they'll need to learn, and they should learn how to integrate into their daily lives as well. And just a quick note about each of these students. 2 of them were seniors, 1 was a junior as they were conducting this project. Isaura, pictured at the top, is now a community fellow for Immigrant Justice Corps in New York. That's a 2-year position. Austin is graduating this year and received early acceptance into law school. And the person who's not pictured as a field researcher, she was a senior last year, she graduated, she's now a research assistant at the Urban Institute. So I'm just going to quickly go through institutional impact. So the report was the main product for me as a researcher in the institution, right? So we presented our findings through this report and during community presentations. But we had 2 very important partners, and one was the Office of Communications, and the other was our Office of Community Engagement and Government Relations. So they assisted us in really elevating the profile of this work by setting up these policy briefings, reaching out to the media and getting us play in a certain respect that would put pressure on policymakers to really review the system and increase its accessibility. And so the community impact. So we always wanted to keep the community front and center in this project. It was their stories really that motivated us to start it and to work together. So one of the outcomes of this was that in 2016, 2 years after the initial law was implemented, an amendment was proposed to the original bill that eliminated the appointment system, and that successfully passed. There's lots of intricacies in how, but it successfully passed, and now undocumented residents are integrated into the daily walk-in flow of service for DMV. There was also, for a 6-month period, the Office of Human Rights provided navigators in each of the DMV offices to help people who had language barriers actually go through the process as well. So, but in the top picture you see, this was a day laborer who was working with Kudo too, who presented with us and gave a personal testimony of what it meant for him to have a license. So I think, in addition to just increasing our campus community relationship, it really humanized, for everyone involved, the effect of how this project and future projects can really make a difference in the lives of undocumented immigrants.
So, it's amazing. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking like all of these, including myself personally, because I live not that far from the Home Depot, and if not for the day laborers who were so graciously helpful for me when I was like fixing things in the house, or just kind people who help you carry things and just that human interaction, all kind of woven together. I think all of our paths are sort of intertwined under this kind of social justice work. So the Peace, Justice, and Inclusion program is the next program we'll talk about. The program came to be and involves the voice of sort of the other side, the children. And so at a time when our country recently had a new president, a president that often was causing a lot of divisiveness and spreading a lot of fear and upsetness and honestly just deep levels of anxiety, not just in adults, but especially in children who feel helpless. We worked with here in our here on campus with students, faculty, and you hear from one of our faculty members who graciously gave her her time, as well as 3 community partners, Central Media, Mommy's TLC, which is another community partner here in DC on Georgia Avenue, and the Big Brothers Big Sister program, all of whom were trying to answer the question, what can we do to not have young people lose hope? Given the fact that they are the future and they have to at some point take up this baton, how can we keep them hopeful? So the goal was to really celebrate the diversity in our mentors and our participants, and I'll talk more about who they are, and you'll get to actually see some of them on the screen in a moment with a video that we created for this project. We also wanted to teach them at this age, and so that them would be middle school students and high school students, how to engage not just in tolerance, but also into looking at equity and our political environment and how to feel empowered, how to have voice. And we also wanted to give them tangible skills for managing conflict. Our children in this program often said, how does he get to be president when he doesn't even know how to get along with people? He doesn't even know how to share things. And so we wanted to empower them from a young age to understand that some of them were far more mature, unfortunately, than some of the leaders, that they were looking at, and how to increase college awareness for them, so that as they were experiencing this program, and we brought them all here to campus, that they would be exposed to college awareness. And what we know is the more they're exposed, the more opportunities they would have for career planning, and being exposed to those who could guide them, the more likely they would be to be able to move down that path with a little bit more ease. So we chose peace as the overall sort of focus for this project, but this was the quote that guided us. Peace, if you want peace, work for justice. And I strongly don't believe in the kumbaya kind of peace. I believe that justice leads to peace. Injustice causes what we often see in our world, in some of the behaviors and the conflicts that we see. So this is an introduction to the Peace, Justice, and Inclusion program. We cross our fingers always for technology. And you'll see various children who participated in this program. Okay.
Let's go out of the slideshow.
Out of this.
I'm on the slide.
The area up the street from our apartment buildings that is like really suffering now, basically not chaos. So like.
Maybe could be one of the videos.
I do too.
We're using a software to be able to record, so.
Yeah.
Maybe we just cut the link out and put it into the browser.
It's so much more there. That's the issue.
Do we need to do it here?
Very good. Do that. That's not your video?
No.
No.
Is it on YouTube? No.
It is.
Oh,
It is.
It's hidden, but yeah, that's why I said it's
Our
our
link
link.
here.
Sure.
If you put our link into the search on
We go back to the, you already cut the list like,
Okay.
if you go back to the
Or
browser.
did I direct on the piece? This one.
Oh, okay, let's go back.
Is this one here, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
There we go.
The mirror feeling.
Yeah,
And can we hit the lights just here?
sure.
The second one here.
Let's go back.
I see.
Better? Okay.
Sliding. I was always sliding. The area of the street of my apartment and stuff is like really rocky, and now it's basically like chaos. So like they do shoot from time to time, are moving funds. A couple of people have been missing up the street.
3 people are hurt, 2 serious. Violence has been increasing here in Southeast and an alarming rate.
Cause gunshots every day to go all throughout the city. Cause innocent people to be harmed.
It's hard for people to do the things that they see, especially when you've seen it since you were a little child. My mom was like, you gonna keep going, your face gonna either get messed up, or you gonna be dead.
We're trying to get as many cities, states, nations in the world to agree to 24 hours of peace. They got no arms, no violence.
With the Peace, Justice, and Inclusion Program, we have community members, public school system, your private university coming together in ways we've never seen before. We have the opportunity to create an initiative for young people with our community partners that would allow us to drive home values, in this case around peace education. We had 4 content areas. You know, just the basic rights of human beings walking on this planet, that everybody has the right to live life in a fair way, an equitable way.
This war, flag war, saw the destruction of war, the pain it caused people, and the pain it brought me and my family. So for that, I'm against war, and I have worked against war since I fled my home country, South Sudan, 18 years ago.
I think one activity I really enjoyed was doing that, and I had the opportunity to facilitate that activity. People coming from all over the city, and then divided them into these groups that were able to become pretty close and watching them bond through the challenge and giggle and struggle at the same time, and then reflect at a pretty deep level about how that activity relates to some of the bigger issues we were talking about, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, just moving like.
We don't want our young people to fear the criminal justice system. What we do want them to do is to understand it. We want them to recognize that the criminal justice system in some ways are broken and in some ways are working, and that it is incumbent upon all of us to actually engage in fixing the parts that are broken and really elevating the parts that are working.
One of the things that we wanted to do was to give voice to some of these folks who are caught in the criminal justice system.
Emmett told advocacy was putting or talking with a white woman. Emmett was black, so he was not.
For me, it was a humbling experience to see that even these 15 and 16-year-olds realize where we are in this space of the world and what they have to do in order to survive from one day to the next.
Young people got to be themselves.
No, you should confront it.
They got to argue with us when they did not agree with us. And we encouraged that kind of rigorous dialogue, and in some cases, they were adamantly disagreeing with us.
Let's talk about that. So what happens if they do say something? Let's go to basics.
Environmental injustice can be often seen in communities that are marginalized. They have the opportunity to learn about it and work for it in the future. Activism was a piece that was woven through. I don't believe that justice can come about without action. And it's not enough to learn it, it's not enough to see it, and it's not enough to just talk about it. You have to engage.
So please be bold, dream big. What is your community? You all define it.
The kids told us constantly how much fun they were having, and that they were learning in the process. And sometimes they were having so much fun they didn't realize that they were learning.
One of the things that I enjoy the most is like actually getting to bond with so many people that I thought I wasn't bond with, like some of the people from American University. I have some, think that there was a lot of families that are very hard for them to be able to understand peace and improvement and justice and what that truly means, not just as, a hashtag or a special type of word, but truly understand the meaning of that and how they can live that throughout their daily lives.
So what we're going to do when we meditate is that we're going to ask our minds to do something, and we're going to expect that our mind will behave.
Teaching students our age meditation is a great way for them to learn a different skill, how to calm down, and like she said, how to choose a better reaction when they are upset or something isn't going the way they probably expected it to go. So I think it's wonderful that she had that experience of learning how to meditate. We have to use role model for kids, for big kids. It doesn't matter if you're really small, you can still be a role model. I wasn't expecting to be so worried about just being in the space of going to the United Nations, but just to see where it all happens, it really makes it more accessible. It makes it more believable. And I think that when you bring children to a space like that, just allowing them to come to Europe, allowing them to go to the United Nations, it's incredible because it does make it real.
Seeing the places where they had like meetings and stuff, it was really fun, and I want to do it again next. I just want to thank everybody that made this program possible. I'm very appreciative of American University and the Peace Justice and Inclusion Program for teaching Eliza and her peers skills that they need to learn and be continue using throughout their life. To make de-escalate situations or prevent things from happening. So I'm grateful for that.
Ray Chambers is a visionary. He challenged us to break the mold in the way a major university engages with the community.
The amount of sweat equity that we put into this program individually and collectively more than doubled the generous gift that we received from Ray Chambers. This program has had a great impact in the community. And so what we will see over time are a group of young people who are engaged, who are active, who see themselves as peacemaker, change agents in the community, and work for positive peace in our world.
We're thinking deeply about the success of this pilot. engaging people like Ray to help us really imagine how we can take this to the next level, to really have a transformational impact. Together, we're going to change lives. We might even save lives. Now that's the power of philanthropy.
I am making that face one and only. I'm creative. I'm self-extraordinary. I'm one of those things. And one thing I'm not is you know who I want to be. I'm my own person, and I'm proud to be who I am. And
I'm grateful for the program because I can imagine how that before I'm here today. I was like, okay, and I didn't think that I was going to catch on to it and be doing it even after so many months now. I don't want them to make the same mistakes as I did, so that's why I kind of like want to be that type of mentor to say like, no, you need to do this right, and this is how it works because I know, and I've been through it, and I know what happens when you do the wrong thing.
But in the interest of time, because I could talk about the Peace, Justice, and Inclusion program forever. And in fact, you know, it always. In 3 months, we're heading to empower young people and give them voice and what often seems scary. I was one of those children. I'm first generation here, first generation in college, and I come from a deeply immigrant family who are often undocumented and children feel the pains of how to navigate and fill those gaps for parents. And so these kids are those, you know, they're those kids. And we wanted to make sure that their voices were heard in ways that were deep and meaningful, not just to the AU community, who they depend on to do something, but also to really, at a time that was very scary, with parents being taken out of homes at night, with, you know, community members at a loss, we could come together and do something deeply impactful as an institution, as students, as faculty, as staff, and that we could see inclusion as our greatest gift that we could give them, and we could model that behavior for them. So you see everyone in this program, and everybody's voice was equal in terms of the work that we did. And Delija and her mom, who you saw together in the video, most of the kids in this program hadn't even traveled past their neighborhoods, and we took them to New York. We took them to the UN, we let them stand behind the podium, and we told them that if they wanted to stand there and they could voice those concerns for their family, for themselves, and for their communities, and they had that right. That as long as they were willing to, that we would continue to champion and support them. So I could tell you a lot of things about this program, but what I can tell you is that both the parents, the children, our staff who mentored, who you saw there, our faculty who were able to serve as experts in content area as well as pedagogy, were really the driving force. And in 3 months, you know, we made a tremendous difference. I can't say that we have changed the world by any stretch of the imagination, but what I can say is our young people feel a little bit more empowered to stand up for what is right in the world.
And finally, Barbara, and my deaf students teach me to clap like this. Thank you. Can I get your slide up? Oh, yeah, we can do that at the end of Marianne, whenever it takes. Thank you so much for letting me be on this panel with you and for all your amazing work. And I am truly humbled to serve on this panel. It's really, really remarkable. I think what I'm hearing from all of this work is that we are building oases, communities of nonviolent resistance against oppression in all its manifestations, in all its forms. This is really important anti-oppression work. So I teach peace education, and I start off with the notion, with the idea that those that have experienced violence the most are often our greatest teachers. Those that have lived in the cauldron of violence, structural violence, by that I mean the unequal distribution of resources, structural violence meaning poverty, but also legal violence, gender violence, environmental violence, violence in all its manifestations. They are our greatest teachers, which is what Robin and all of you have exhibited. And we know that militarism and military spending disproportionately impact marginalized communities. So I really start off with the kids and in my classes. First of all, building trust, building community. That's the most critical thing we can do, is to model deep democracy in action in our classrooms. Why should they trust us? Why should they care? So we have to build that oasis of peace and nonviolence and trust and social justice first, like a Montessori classroom. And as you saw, it's all different ages teaching each other and mentoring each other, which is what Maria Montessori taught us so long ago. But in this particular program, I really tried to ask the students, let's flip the script. What does violence look like in your lives? You teach me. What is conflict in your community? Draw it in a panorama or in an illustration. And so that we could use multiple intelligence theory, building on all of their strengths and skills, not just talking or lecturing, but they could actually illustrate it and animate it. So they explained to us, this is what violence looks like in my life. And we really unpacked how violence is a spectrum, going from the home, in the community, a continuum all the way up to nuclear war. And it's at all levels that we have to interrupt these cycles of violence. And then we went deep on nonviolent struggle. Where has it existed in the world? Where has it succeeded? Where has it failed and why? And I unscrolled a huge giant banner of all the nonviolent struggles in history dating back to biblical times. All the amazing, powerful people who went before us, and that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and that we're not alone, and that people have overcome incredible odds to stand up against unjust authority, to disobey unjust authority, and to build their resilience for nonviolent struggles. So we looked at labor struggles, environmental struggles, women's struggles, peace struggles, and there was a huge timeline that my students had been building for a long time. And I asked the kids from all over DC, where do you see yourself in that timeline? And then they all stepped up and they wrote themselves into the timeline, and they had no hesitation about it. They were completely empowered. They're like, I'm right up there with Harriet Tubman, I'm right up there with Cesar Chavez, I'm right. They just stepped to the plate and they said, I am a powerful peace advocate. Your staff also prepared amazing handouts on what is activism, how you do social change. I'm not doing the program justice. We can only scratch the surface. But all kudos to your staff. What is the young woman's name?
So, and when I say it took a village, it really took a village of all of us. And so Michelle Swinger and Aubrey, I don't know why I lost Aubrey's last name in this moment, were two grad students who were involved with me and faculty in designing the programs now, who have gone on as professionals to implement this, both the approach and the pedagogy for how do you move and work bring people together around an initiative like these or other kinds of community engagement initiative. So unfortunately, it was not a lot that was designed towards the children. So we actually had to write our curriculum. And so we wrote that curriculum. The amount of research that we did, it took us a whole semester of research to execute 3 months of a program that was, contained within 3 workshops and a trip to the UN. So as you all know, it's quite the heavy lifting of the research and creating the structural pieces. But the outcome meant that they could take that home, they could share that in their communities, they could continue to be that person in their community.
I just thought this 5-color handout, very colorful handout that the staff prepared for the kids, distilling down a ton of research and theory into very simple, clear, accessible, kid speak. How do you do activism? This is what it looks like. You have the ability to change the conditions in your community, in our society, and in the world. So taking them from the local to the global, thinking globally, acting locally. And I brought to bear a lot of my experiences of working in war zones, protecting human rights activists from the death squads, walking side by side as a bodyguard for human rights with Peace Brigades International in various war zones where I worked around the world. And we just shut up and listen to the locals. We say to the locals, what do you need? We will just shadow you and be your partners. And create the political breathing space for them to come up with their own solutions. That's the model of Peace Brigades and many of these peace teams. And that's what we were really doing with these kids as well, is listening to them, as Robin said, asking what they needed the most, but they actually could see themselves doing social change and taking a lot of their upset and rage or troubles and really channeling it into positive change. To flip the script, that they are not the purveyors of violence, that they swim in a culture of violence, media violence, legal violence, these other forms of violence, and that we can transform that violence. So not to be afraid of conflict, but to harness conflict, to use it to move groups healthy, in healthy directions. So we tried to pull back and look at all the pillars of peace building and peace education being one piece of a much broader tapestry. Sorry, the graphic on this is a little bit bad, but doing the trauma healing, doing the social justice, the structural change, the law and advocacy, restorative justice, and all of its component parts. I've distilled down for you in a handout what are the best practices in peace building, what have we found, whether it's overseas in various conflict areas around the world or in our own inner cities. One of the things we have found is that you have to build multi-ethnic, multi-issue, multi-religious, multi-faith coalitions. They are much more effective, much more sustainable in ending violence. Females and marginalized groups are probably the most powerful peacemakers that we have, and if they're not represented in equal numbers in any project, it's going to fail because they address the structural causes that gave rise to the violence in the first place. We learned this from people like the women of Liberia. They didn't just beat their breasts and say, I want to be the Minister of Defense, I want to be the head of the parliament. They said, what gave rise to the war in the first place? Let's go to the roots of that in any peace agreement. Efforts have to be homegrown and led by the locals. They have ideas, ownership, agency. They're not just victims. Peace building has to be rooted in the local customs, the local traditions, their values, their community. But most importantly, it has to leave a legacy of institutions and systems that will address violence in the future, that go to the roots of inequality. So you have to actually create lasting systems in that the young people can support themselves. We also find in the field of peace education, peace building, that things are only going to work if you can actually foster livelihoods for people, which is exactly all that you've been doing, is jobs, jobs, jobs. It's so important to rehabilitate and reintegrate former gang members, former child soldiers, whoever has been coming out of prison. I do a lot of work with prisoners in DC. So the reintegration of folks who have suffered the most from violence and offering them alternative livelihoods. And the best peace building movements inoculate folks against hate, vaccinate people against intolerance and racism and prejudice and incitements to violence. So teaching nonviolent discipline, nonviolence training, education, mobilization for resistance, and disobedience to illegal authority. So I've recreated this peace building wheel for you. I've put a definition of peace education and peace building on the back and the best practices in what we found. So if you could take just one of each of these handouts and pass it along. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This we did for you as a result of this project because partners were at the foundation and the center of this. of telling us and helping to be that voice and that funnel of information for us is 12 steps to creating strong partnerships that hold programs like this in ways that really support what's happening in the classroom, with what's happening in the community to really deal with some really complicated issues that our communities and our world are facing.
So I want to give a final round of applause to all the panelists. And I want to make sure we use our final 10 minutes for all of you. So any questions you have, feel free to.
We have 15
let us
minutes
know.
actually.
Well, we're actually have to be out of here for an evaluation, so we should lose no time. Dave, go ahead.
Could you just talk briefly about how aspects of this could be applied to community transits to this campus? How could it be applied? What is the suggestion?
I can start with, like, this project was layered in so many ways. Sometimes it was so challenging, to say the least, to remind ourselves of all the pieces that we were also mentoring. So our grad students who were in both the learning seat and the creation seat, our students, the children, the high school students mentoring, we mentored up and we mentored down. So we had faculty and staff mentoring our college students, grad students creating equally with staff and faculty. We had the children who were also giving voice to, they were in the driver's seat. They were saying, this is what we need to know. It's great you want to tell me this, but like, this is what we need to know. And so then our undergrad students who were learning, they were learning these concepts, they were learning how to fuse the discipline as well as the action together in doing meaningful work now as young professionals, but also in the future.
Yeah, and we needed that. And then I should have been a little clear. I meant our students. So like the children you're talking about in the model, I'm asking for an example of how with our students going through this for peace building on campus, that's possible and how.
Yeah, I think there's is that okay? I think there's a lot of initiatives underway like this already that may be not on our radar screen, but there's a lot of conversations where people do share experiences of violence, whether it be sexual violence, racism. I do know that the dialogue programs on campus have been a real cauldron for taking conflicts cross-culturally, racially, with veterans and Black Lives Matter folks and the darkening, and really using those dialogue programs as a way of transforming conflict, learning from it, and learning from each other. So that's one small piece of it. But also modeling as professors, what are we doing as activists in the community? Are we stepping up? Are we exhibiting social and political courage? Are we willing to go and get our students out of jail when they've been rounded up by ICE, which I had to do yesterday, and thank God my United States Senator intervened, Mark Warner, actually called me at home saying, how can I help you get the student out of prison, out of Farmville in Southern Virginia. It's like bone chilling. Anyway, so I think that if we talk the talk and walk the walk, that also sends a signal to our students that we're not just operating on campus. Our campus is a very important community, and then we have to build partnerships and insider, outsider allies. I don't know if that answers your question.
If there's a technical piece, we also did workshop training for them. We trained them on how to sit in the seat as a mentor. We trained them on how to be able to implement the pedagogy that we had taught them. We trained them how to, what are those expectations between a very fine line between being a mentor and being a savior or a parent. That their line was mentor was very different. And tiered mentoring was also very different because they were teaching as they were doing at the same time. So that was another layer of that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Carl from SIS. So my question is a little more about the classroom, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what we've learned, or what you've learned about immigrants at AU in the classroom. So, for example, I'm wondering if there are differences or tensions between students who are immigrants and foreign students. I mean, I don't have many challenges in interacting with our foreign students because many of them come from well-to-do families and so forth and so on, but an immigrant student, a refugee student, could be a very different situation. And I'm just wondering, first of all, what you've learned about those conversations between students themselves, and also sort of how I, as a faculty member, can help respond and identify those situations. I'm looking at Diana, but
Diana, but I think other people in the audience are in a position to also respond.
I mean, how do I identify that? How do I
I'm thinking about an example. So I'm just kind of thinking and talking out loud. I think, so I teach a class called Immigration and Social Justice at Georgetown, and most of the students, if they come from immigrant backgrounds, the first or second generation, I've had undocumented students in the class, and it's open to graduate students, so once in a while I've had one or two international students who also sit in the class, and I think there is an unspoken tension on any campus between international students and like native born or second generation. But I think in the class it actually helped discussions because they both looked at it from different perspectives. I think, first and second generation learned some of the root cause, how our foreign policy, right, and some of country origin policies are integrated into that, into migration. And international students also learn more about our domestic policies and immigration policies and understand better, that why integration has this varied experience among different immigrants, right? And so some immigrants can, have this upward mobility and become very successful. Some, may face this downward assimilation, and so they learn more. I think it just enhances their understanding of each other's groups. I didn't necessarily have to, I don't think that kind of tension ever came out in class. I think it was just kind of like more of a quiet understanding, and I, saw this through their papers and through their presentations.
Other examples?
Yes. So I work again with English language teachers, and it's very interesting, I think, what I've observed, and it's a combination of U.S. born students who might not associate with immigrant communities, some second, even first generation immigrants, and a number of international students. I saw that sometimes international students cannot relate to certain struggles or understand the struggles of students who are children of immigrants or who immigrated into the country earlier in their lives and consider themselves to be U.S. Americans and native local or fluent English speakers. So I started with thinking about the reading materials that I offer that can challenge sort of the perspective. As at some point I heard a speaker and read that offer reading materials that were not written for this particular audience. So something that offers them a completely different perspective. And also creating activities where it's not about, oh, your parents immigrated here, what do you think? But rather creating activities where they can collaborate on some type of project and learn from each other and share experiences and also go in a community and perhaps work with community members. So it doesn't become kind of a project that sort of targets who you are or forces them to explain who they are, but rather where they collaboratively figuring out who they are and what it means for them to be here in the classroom, to be English language teacher, to be an English language teacher who can be compassionate and kind and knowledgeable and support their English language learners, regardless of their background.
One more example.
Yes, I usually see a conflict of, well, it's not a conflict, but there is sort of a misgiving when Latin American students sit down with Latino students in the same classroom, and they usually come from different backgrounds, not necessarily always, but usually Latin American students are from well-to-do families and they go to bilingual schools, and that places them in a very different position when they come here. And my Latino students, find that they cannot establish these kinds of relationships. So as Melina said, it's up to us, how to help them bridge that gap and talk to each other. And the fact that my Latino students say, I don't know much about the history of my parents' countries, and the Latin American students think that they know all there is to know about history, but they don't. And so that, it depends on how you approach that, but the university itself has tried to help students, bridge those gaps and come together, sometimes unsuccessfully, but as far as I know, like last semester, there was an intention of bringing again, there's a last organization of Latin American and Latino students in Campos, and it is sort of rebuilding because it had bad experiences, and because of this lack of connection that I think we, from the classroom, can help, sort of bridge those gaps, not necessarily just outside as a student organization only.
Did that answer your question? A couple examples? Okay, other questions? Other questions, comments, reactions, anything that would be useful for you in terms of implementing any of the ideas or adaptations? Yes,
I just wanted to add something on what Ludy and Paulina said is about this. As teaching in Latin American studies, when we get American students, international students, there is a class issue which is very powerful there because they usually come from very, I don't want to just be very determinist here, but they usually come from very wealthy families. So they are identical with that group, very, privileged group in Latin America that have run the show for many, many years. And this is an issue when they come and face, and have to be in the same classroom as people whose parents had to immigrate precisely because of that huge gap between their families and those families. So what I was trying to say is that when, for us, who teach and might come from those backgrounds, we understand in a way, but sometimes university tends to put Latino in the same box, and it's like, okay, Latino itself doesn't really incorporate equality, and it's difficult. I'm very reluctant to go that way because I myself have I come from Europe, so I'm not even in that part of the,
Same with Asians.
world. So
Asians are completely, diaspora of Asians, but in the U.S., we, in our American culture, love to simplify things for assimilation purposes, for other purposes. And so we think all Asians are specifically of Chinese, Mandarin, Han kind of culture, and that's ridiculous. So maybe to your point, it also shows that because you asked the question, that we as educators should be responsible to also engage in that learning of what do I need to improve?
Just going back, sorry, just going back to the classroom, I think at least as as the person in the classroom, we need to be able to make those distinctions just for the sake of making things a bit easier and more,
Could we just ask, what partnerships do you have in the community? What links do you have? Who are you working with in the community? Anybody?
Well, it's not, I would say, direct partnership for us, but we work with Washington English Center, which is a community-based ESL program that provides.
Yes, I know it, yeah.
So our students go and tutor, and our current students has curriculum instruction there, so we kind of.
What was yours?
I'm on the associate of Washington,
so that's, I can't run enough, so I can.
No, I was just going to say it's that inclusion, and this is where partners in the community relationships really can support that inclusion in classroom and giving different perspectives. And I think as faculty, as staff working with faculty, that inclusion piece is a piece that we have to have deeper and a larger breadth of conversation around, even in literature. I often hear students say to me, Robin, was there no persons from this side of the world alive when they chose the readings? So I think thinking about it from every standpoint, is a larger conversation.
So just to close, we do have to get out of the room, we have to do our evaluation, but I invite you also to come and speak to any of the presenters. We have a couple copies of Diana's report about community-based research, and also to emphasize, these are high impact practices. These are practices that we think can really transform our students' lives. It can help them make career choices, but at the same time, they have to be reciprocal relationships. We don't want them to say, well, we we definitely enhance the learning and the possible future decisions that many of our students make, but we also say that hand in hand, we are trying to understand the community we're in, whether it's local or global, and talk about meaningful ways to create dialogue and discussion, so we are simultaneously making our world a better place to live in. And with that,
It's a session 107, by the way.
okay, 107. So thank you all for coming. We had a little more time, but we appreciate you being here. Thanks, everyone.